Hey to my parenting and noir tribe. It's me, Alicia, coming to you on, I hope, in your neck of the woods, a bright and beautiful Tuesday in October. It's amazing how quickly time is passing by. Feels like it was just beginning of spring and now we're into fall. So I am making my peace with the fact that the seasons do happen and that we are into the slide towards the colder weather, which I am not a fan of. Not sure about you, but I could do without it. I'm going to enjoy these last few bright 80-degree weather days that we have. So hopefully you do as well. So I'm coming to you today to continue part of my hibernation ice breaking video that I recorded a few weeks ago, just to give a little bit of a status update for myself. As I alluded to in the video, just dealing with life and lifing over the past many months and the tremendous toll it's taken. Um, it has been, without a doubt, one of the more trying periods of my life. I wouldn't say it's the most trying period, but it's definitely exerted a pretty heavy toll in terms of me, my functioning, and just my general outlook. So, this sort of reflection that I'm in terms of the period that I find myself is a necessity. It is one that I think we should all do more of, but for many of us, we don't stop our day to actually reflect on what is going on in our life. How are we feeling? Are we where we want to be? Are we where we think we can be? More importantly, because sometimes I think we fall into the trap of thinking, oh, well, I wanted to do A, B, and C, and B, all of these things. And perhaps they're realistic, perhaps they're things that were more along the fantasy line for us. But just being open and honest with saying, okay, here I am. But what are some of the things I truly desire to have in my life? Whether it's manifesting those things, whether it is work that is in progress, things that we have been holding on, but recognizing that these are still important aspects of our life that, as I said, many of us just don't take the time, whether by choice or by circumstance, to have that time of reflection. And to be perfectly honest, reflecting is hard and scary, because after you reflect, and I guess it's not a after because it should be a continuous type of thing, but once your reflection period for that particular process is done, you may be called to make some really tough decisions, or you may not like what you discover about yourself or about your life or about your experiences through that reflection. So I think for many of us, it is a choice to not take that time because we are afraid of what happens when we truly pause and say, are you happy? Are you content? Are you making the strides that you want to make? Are you being true to who and what you are on the inside, not necessarily what people see on the outside or what they expect from you on the outside, but more importantly, are you listening to that gentle voice or that hum um, internally that often is our direction setter, that tells us, like, okay, I might be kind of good at this, but perhaps those things don't quite line up with who our parents have told us they want us to be, or who we have chosen to be because of our friend circle or society or things like that. And so when you get to a point where you recognize that you are living an I would say a life that's not authentic, it is a struggle because it then becomes this perennial unrest that you feel, where you recognize you're not living in your moment, in your truth, in your whatever. And it makes the days a little bit longer, it makes the rest a little less restful. And so, as a part of my evolution in this reflection period that I find myself in, I struggle with whether to make and post this video, simply because we like to whitewash our lives. We want people to think we are doing things perfectly or we're doing things well, that there are little to no struggles in our lives, and that we are on top of things. And so, conversations along the lines of what I have had with friends over the most recent past, um, illustrate that things may not be as picture perfect as people would like to believe, or you would like for them to believe them to be. But it doesn't mean that the picture is any less beautiful, or any less realistic. So a part of that struggle for me has really been how transparent to be about where I am in life, and my hopes and dreams, and more importantly, my actions. So, without a lot of backstory, I will say a lot of my life has been about achievement. It has been from the time I was a small child, of being told, you're really smart, you know things, you're doing things, you're going to do things, you're going to go places. And a lot of that being manifested in my actions of recognizing that life and schooling and stuff like that have come relatively easy to me. And so I've been on this journey to excel, from the early stages of my grandfather saying, you're going to do well. And I know this. And making that happen, and then recognizing that there is some joy in accomplishments, in getting the degrees, and getting the jobs, and getting the different levels of advancement. It provided me with some sort of pleasure. And so I continued, working my way from graduating with honors in high school to going to college, to then working and doing graduate school, and then deciding, oh, I think I'll go get a doctoral degree. And ultimately achieving that. Those have been things that I have, been proud of and I've held dear. Um, One of the fallacies, though, is that sometimes with all of this forward momentum and progress, you don't pause to say, is this the path that I want for myself? Is the acquisition of all of these degrees and these jobs and things like that, is it getting me into the direction that I see for my life? Or is it more a matter, of course, of fulfilling the things that other people have told you is their expectation of what they see for you? And so that poses a challenge for me, at this point in my life, because I've done the things, academically, that I wanted to do. Um, I have moved into different jobs and spaces really intentionally in terms of, um, the work that really gives me passion. But unfortunately, as you continue your work climbs and you get into different positions, the amount of work that is required of you is sometimes, I'm going to be honest, I think unrealistic. I think, there's a constant quest for us who are perhaps people pleasers, or people who are type A excellers, who are rule followers, to consistently be in a place where we are trying to achieve this elusive goal. It feels like the goalpost does shift each time we reach a milestone. It's like, oh, okay, well, if I've done that, then I can do more. And sometimes we're telling ourselves that, and sometimes it's our employers, our families, our friends, our whatever. And so, again, there's this constant moving of the goalposts. So you don't really feel satisfied in your achievements because it feels like there's something else next. And whether you think there's something else, or someone else is telling you there's something else, you're constantly kind of seeking and striving. And so for me, that has been, almost like the never ending quest of, proving myself, professionally, and then having people to say, oh, I think you can stretch even more. Have you thought about this, and have you thought about that? And sometimes in those asks are not necessarily the volunteer as we know, but it's the voluntold. It is that this is what you're going to do because I want you to do it, whether it's, to relieve pressure from their plates, or just new areas of inquiry. And, I will hazard to say that often, as people of color, Black women in particular, we are seeking to prove ourselves. We're seeking to be the best and the brightest, and the I got it, and I'm always going to be the person you can turn to load up, and it's going to be awesome because I'm going to do it. But we don't necessarily pause to recognize, in that pursuit, are we, overextending ourselves? Are we overpromising? Are we, then having to tap into other places internally, usually, in order to make sure that we are able to fulfill the things that people seem to expect us to do and fulfill. And it comes at a cost. For a lot of us, the cost is we don't take care of ourselves, we don't eat well. Whether it's under eating or overeating, stress eating, those sorts of things. We may not work out because if you're sitting at a desk for 8 to 10 or more hours, it is difficult to, and I want to pause and say it's not difficult, but we make it difficult to slice um, that time of work with, oh, I'm going to take a walk for 30 minutes, or I'm going to knock off for an hour, and to put those blocks on our calendar, or to do whatever we need to do if we're in the type of work line where we get to choose kind of our schedule. For many of us, we don't get to choose schedules, and you may say, all right, this is it, I am a hourly worker, and so I'm on the clock, I don't have time to pause and go for a walk. Even if I get a 30-minute lunch, I'm going to eat in my car, and I'm going to decompress and then get back to the grind. So it sets up almost a circular pattern where you are just stuck in this rut of being unwell, whether it's physically, mentally, emotionally, because you're not being good to your body. A lot of us just do not sleep well. We either are struggling with our minds and our perpetual to do list and not being able to shut off. And so, in those quiet times, when the house is asleep, whether mates, children, fur babies, whatever it is, that's the time when our minds are cycling and we're like, oh my gosh, okay, so what did I do today? Oh, I didn't do enough of that. Tomorrow I've got to hit these 10 things on this list. And then we start to judge ourselves when we're constantly slipping on those lists that probably are not realistic because as a dear friend, Latricia Henry, had noted in a interview I did with her, our to do lists are so big, they are almost unachievable because you literally have so many things on the to do list. You start to feel adrift, and at a certain point, for some people, if you can't achieve the things on the list, you just stop trying to achieve things, and things just completely just go stagnant. And so that is a struggle that many of us do experience in terms of prioritizing for ourselves and our lives. And so I will be sure to pin a link to the video I did with Latricia because I think there's a lot of good information she had about choosing ourselves, prioritizing, not trying to achieve and to solve the problems of the world in one day, but to recognize what is truly important and what we need to do versus what we don't. And so in that never ending cycle of me trying to achieve all the things at the same time and to do them well, I have continued to do a disservice to myself. I've wanted to show up as an ideal employee. Again, as I said, Black woman, imposter syndrome of I can't be as good as they say I am, so I've got to continuously prove it. Or the Black woman superhero, where I have to wear that S on my chest. They expect it. So, of course, I can't push back, or when I do, and then they kind of push me forward, I have to keep going. And so, being in that cycle of being that model employee, of being the parent of a small child and wanting to do that well and be present for her and making sure that her needs and her desires are kind of ever present in my thinking and that my actions revolve around that has also been, I would say, a joy as well as sometimes causing difficulty because to be the things you need for your child sometimes does mean you not choosing yourself. And I recognize that the answer isn't always to choose your children every time non-negotiably, and just like it's not the option to always choose yourself and let your children take a back seat. It's always a balancing act. And so I recognize that it does come at a cost for people in terms of making those decisions for who comes first, when, and how. And so for me, being on that wonderful merry-go-round of trying to be all the things for all the people, I leave myself behind. I've left myself behind. And slowly but surely, your body will start to gently tell you, and then a little bit more insistently, and then it starts to scream. When, if you think about a car, your check engine light is on. You may have had an issue before that check engine light came on, but then you try to ignore it. and you try to keep driving. You're like, okay, well, I'm gonna ignore that check engine light. For some people, you actually put a little piece of tape over that check engine light so that you don't have to see it and to pretend that I'm just gonna keep going, I'm gonna keep driving. The problem is not there because I can't see it. And then at some point, you try to turn your car on and it doesn't start, it's just clicking or whatever. Or you're driving and it breaks down and you're on the side of the road and you're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe my car broke down. What is happening? What do I do when you recognize that there have been little signs and little indicators that have been in your face for quite some time, but you've tried to ignore them, you've tried to cover them up, um, and then when the problem actually unfolds, it's a big problem versus what might have been a minor problem before. And so that's similar to me and my experiences of the past few years. I would say the pandemic, particularly, um, there was a toll that came from that of just again trying to manage life and the uncertainty of the pandemic, and also being present for work and being present for a child and trying to keep her safe and sound and all of that. And so from that point on, it's just been almost like a downward slide where you see that check engine light is on, but again, you're not looking at it, you are looking past it, you are putting your piece of tape on it or whatever. And so that's consistently been the case for me over these past, like I said, few years, with it increasing over the past year or so, namely from having ultimately two surgeries in a less than a year's time span. One surgery last fall, and then having to have a revision surgery impairment from my first surgery. And so both of those are drains because number one, the first is you trying to figure out like, okay, what's the problem, and this is going to solve the problem. And then the second is, I think something isn't quite right, but maybe it's just in my mind. And then recognizing, nope, this is an issue, and then having to deal with going back in to surgery to get things fixed. And so luckily at this stage, I'm good to go physically, but the physical toll, the emotional toll of not quite knowing what's going on, it does take a lot. And at the same time, still having to show up in all of the various places and spaces in life that you occupy a role, and wear a hat. And doing those without necessarily allowing yourself to be present with what you're feeling and your thoughts and concerns. And so that just the physical aspects of life were quite a lot for me. I think also being in a place where I liken it to golden handcuffs, being in jobs that are very well paying or jobs where you feel like there are a lot of benefits or privileges there. You can be stuck. You can be stuck in places where you're not quite sure how you're feeling about your work or your life as an employee at this place, but you almost are cemented there, glued there because of all of the things that you perceive to be the value and the benefit of that particular employment. It may be a place where you are so busy that you can't think about, is this where I want to be? Are there other options out there? And so you're kind of in this cycle where you're again feeling stuck for whatever reason. And in instances where, for me, work has been so busy and so challenging and really not being able to truly catch a breath, it makes it even harder to keep myself centered and how I'm feeling and my desires. And just recognizing that all of these things will come to an head. Um, as I noted, following surgery, instead of taking time for myself, and again, following my second surgery, that is, not taking time for myself to heal, recognizing that the surgeon said, oh, well, it's probably only a few days of downtime. You have a sedentary office job, you'll be fine. And so, kind of taking that to the bank, and then also circumstances where I did not have the ability to take the time I needed for my body to physically recover, um, just simply because um, by luck of fate, having leadership who was out at the same time, I felt like I had to show up. If my doctor said that it's only going to be a few days of downtime, then who am I to come back to my employer, or to my colleagues and say, oh, you know, that little bit of downtime that I said I was going to take? Oh no, I actually probably need a good 4 to 6 weeks. And so instead of being present in what was actually going on with my body and how recovery can take longer than envisioned, even under the most ideal circumstances, I had to push through and plow through. And for anyone who's had to work when you are uncomfortable or sick in any way, it's harder, especially if you have to devote extra hours. So if you're not in a 40-hour a week job, you're having to do the most. It is hard because then when do you rest? When do you actually have a chance to recuperate and recover? And so that cycle really made the downward slope very steep for me. And then, of course, when leadership is available, not necessarily being honest about how challenging things may have been for me. Because I think another aspect of life that we struggle with as people, and I will again say my black and brown people in particular, is we want to be seen in positive lights with our bosses, with whomever. And so we often will downplay when we're having difficulties or struggles. We don't want to be perceived as the person who's whining or or saying just how tough it was and all of that, because we see it as a sign of weakness. And so in first, seeing things like that as a sign of weakness, we actually do a disservice to ourselves, because then we don't allow life and our experiences to humanize us. We want to be seen as almost these robots that can do all the things, and then it turns into a place where, because you're not being authentic, because you have not allowed yourself the place and space to have healing, physical healing, it starts to take an emotional toll, a mental toll, and all sorts of stuff. And it's difficult to pull yourself up when you're starting to go in that downward spiral, because you've not been in tune to yourself physically, you've not been in tune to yourself emotionally, you've not been in tune to yourself mentally. You've had to do what? Not look at that check engine light, put a little piece of tape or sticker over that light to continue to go. So then when all of a sudden your car is overheating, you see exhaust, or smoke from the engine, then all of a sudden it is literally mission critical and you have no choice but to stop. And so for me, it really came to a head in terms of not being open and honest about my humanness, about my experiences and where I was. And instead of doing that, putting my head down and coming back and getting piled on with additional work, because wow, you did so well in that process, you're clearly capable and functional, let's keep going. And again, not wanting to be perceived as whining, not being perceived as not wanting to do additional work or not being capable of doing additional work, but more importantly, just saying, I might need a moment. I might need a moment, whether it's a day, a week, a month. I might need a moment now to go back to a place of choosing me and being good to me. And because that didn't happen, I essentially burned out. I got to the point where life was hard. I was upset all the time. I was very cranky, patience level very low. Things that were simple would frustrate me. And recognizing that I was beginning to manifest that in my relationships with family, with friends, with my daughter, of just being angsty, and recognizing shutting myself down, not wanting to be around people, not wanting to do things, and not being open and honest that that's a sign of depression. It is not a stigma where whether it's a mild form, a moderate form, or severe, it is still you being depressed, you not being able to function in your life and not necessarily having the tools to cope. And for me, luckily, I have been in work with a therapist for the past year or more, and she was seeing the warning signs the whole time. Each time we would meet, she was concerned, and she would say, "You are struggling with your functioning. This is a lot. Your work is a lot. Do you need a break? You should take a break. I think you need a break." And me, no, 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 I've got it. It's okay. I'm good, with tears coming down my face, because again, we are taught that you drag yourself across all these lines, and in doing so, I recognize that I was fighting kind of a no win fight. I have people around me that it's clear I'm not interested in engaging. I want to just kind of be home and still and quiet as much as possible, because the world is just so loud and noisy from work and, like I said, all the other things. And to be in a place where, again, luckily, with therapy, being able to see what the warning signs were, and that I could advocate for myself, that this was not just a situation that I have to live in forever and be unhappy and literally and completely burn out, but that there are tools and resources available. And one of those was taking time off. For many of us, taking time off from work is an absolute unknown. Like, we just don't do it. We barely take our vacation days. I know there are some people who are team fly out, and you're out. If you can get a day off and get you some vacation time, or you can finagle a holiday, you are on somebody's plane, in somebody's automobile, somewhere doing your thing. Kudos to you. I think for the average person, at least here in America, we often do not. We work ourselves into the ground. For some people, they have very little vacation time to take. So they're always hoarding it for special occasions, like, oh, let's take a week off for Christmas, or let's do this, or let's do that. So the system sometimes is kind of rigged in terms of, can you truly take the time you need, because you don't really have the time. For some of us who may be in salaried positions where we get more flexible leave, more paid time off, things like that, we do have the ability to take those days. But again, the nature of the work, if you're super busy, then how do you take that time off? How do you easily, if you're working 50 or 60 hours a week, a day, a week, or whatever off, without, for a lot of us, intense guilt, or a lot of planning. Like, you're doing more work to get to the point of taking that break and that leave than likely will allow you to rest on that leave, because then you're like, wait, what did I not do before I left? And are they going to be okay? And is someone calling me? Because in some people's jobs, their employers are calling them when they're on vacation, when they're on paid time off. So again, never ending cycles of not being able to decompress, to disconnect, to truly be away and to nurture yourself, whatever that looks like. And so for me, I have been blessed with a job that does have flexible leave. But again, being so busy, and at a point right now where my work, my team, down staffing. And so you have guilt in terms of still taking that time off, because you're like, if I take this time off, someone else has to do it. I'm overburdening the next person. And so therefore, I'm not going to do it. But as my therapist said to me, if you drop in your tracks, if you're unable to work, what happens? The work continues. You're not the president of this company. You're not the person who's signing people's paychecks. And so basically, if you stop working, there is someone who will do whatever work is critical in that moment. As she said, if you were to drop in your tracks and be impaired or permanently unable to do this work, there may be a respectful mourning period. That work is going to soon recommence, because that's the nature of life. And so recognizing that I can continue to do the things, to be the overachiever, to be the, almost the pack mule of load me up, throw it on, I got it. All the while physically, emotionally breaking down, trying to bandage it and not doing so. It does no one any good. And so exploring with my therapist options for leave. For many of us, again, if you are a salary worker, there's short term disability. There are family medical leave opportunities where you have job protection. It doesn't, to be clear, family medical leave does not pay you. Often that is unpaid, that you can then use your paid time off or your vacation time. You can pair that with short term disability to still get income from your employer, but at least the family medical leave, FMLA, as you may have heard, gives you that job protection. In different states, there may be more FMLA than others. And so you would need to check with your employer, your state, just to see kind of what your FMLA looks like. You can explore short term disability. If you're having physical impairment, if you're having mental health issues, that's an opportunity for you to figure out, is this something that will require this time, and utilizing it in terms of that function so that you're not also now off and worried about how do you pay your bills, how do you have, put food on the table, that sort of thing, that you have that coverage. But just recognizing that you have options, sitting or standing or just dwelling in places where you are literally on fire. You just, you don't know who and what you are anymore because you are so many things for everyone else, that you're not who you are for you. Never will prosper. In the end, you're going to burn out. And for a lot of us, we ignore the warning signs. Again, that check engine light that's in the corner that we try to look every direction but that one. um, at some point, that light will manifest in terms of the breakdown in the various systems that were trying to give you the warning signs from the beginning. And so I want to encourage anyone who's listening to this message is to be open and honest with yourself. Take that time for reflection. Take that time to say, am I where I want to be? Am I where I can be? And am I doing the things that give me fulfillment right now? If not, what would I do? As they say, if wishes were horses and finances were not a thing, what would you be doing? What would you want to do? Where would you want to be doing it? And that's the first step in cracking that code, that life code that many of us have, is being honest and saying, what do you want for yourself in your life? Now, what is achievable? So for many of us, I can say I want to be a billionaire. That may not be achievable unless I make some radical steps in order to get to that point. But the question I would have for myself is, okay, if you want to be a billionaire, what are the tangible steps that you would need to take to get you there? And if you don't have the answer, do you know someone or someones that you can talk to begin to plot at that course, the path? Do you have the various tools in your toolbox to get you to that point? Or what are the things that you think could propel you to that place that you can ultimately get there? And then decide if you're going to take one step, if you're going to take two steps, if you're going to take three steps towards whatever those things are, whatever your ultimate desire is. Your, when I'm laying in bed and no one knows what's going on in my mind, what do I see for myself? Who am I in that fantasy world? And then recognizing, is that fantasy world truly a fantasy, or is that some reality that just takes a lot of work, that for most of us, we don't want to do it? We feel like we can't do it, that we need to have all of these other tools and other things. And that's not true. You don't. Often the things that you have for that success and that fantasy world that you see in your mind for you and your life, they're actually attainable. But for many of us, we're so afraid to began that process, because sometimes, as I have said, it's not necessarily fear of failure that grips people. It's fear of success. It is fear of what happens if I am wildly successful at being that thing that I see in my mind's eye for myself. What happens? How does my life change? Do I think I can encompass that for myself? And for many of us, we are so afraid of that answer that we'll never ever get to that point of knowing. And so the dedication and the focus that I am seeking for my future self starts with my daily in the present self. I want to stop fantasizing about the life that I want and living that life. And part of that is not being so crippled by success and achievements and what people say you're supposed to be and do in your life, that you get so bound with that there isn't any room for growth and development and creativity. There isn't room for you to branch out in ways that are just unknown and untested for you, because I promise you, there's likely someone that has walked a path that may not be your path, but they've walked a path that have some similar elements. So there are places and spaces where you can see success. You just may not see your face in those places and spaces yet. But I caution you to start to fantasize more out loud. Start to fantasize more in your actions. Start to fantasize more in your intentions. Start to take those fantasies and make them a reality, one step at a time. And when one step scares you, take a deep breath, pause, then take another step and another step. Because what we don't recognize in this life path that we're on is that it's okay. You can back up a step. What I don't want you to do is do an about face and go back in the other direction, because that other direction often represents what we don't want in our lives. It is things that we've experienced, we've done, we've checked off the list. So now what? But I also don't want you to constantly feel like you need to be in a place of discovery and new improvements, and to recognize that you too can be what you want in your fantasy world. Again, for me, the reality that I have had to confront, that I am not Superwoman. And yes, that sounds really almost arrogant. I'm not Superwoman. Of course you're not. No one thought you were. But for many of us, we have set ourselves up in the various orbits of our world to give people the impression that we think we are. And because of that, people will often load you up. They'll say, well, if you got it, then get this or get that. And again, we don't want to look bad. We don't want to look incapable. And so what happens? We accomplish and we accommodate, and we continue to be loaded upon. So recognize, take your rest, take your break. And if you sit here in this moment and you feel a twinge and you say, I can't, I don't know how, that tells me you need one now. You need one critically and urgently. Because when you say, I don't know how, I don't know when, that that says that your world is so overwhelming that if you continue in this way, you will continue to lose more and more and more of yourself. Advocate for what you need. If you have a mental health therapist, talk to that person. Get some resources, get some suggestions for how to manage and cope, and more importantly, to start to be resilient and thrive, because we don't want to be in a place where we're constantly coping. We want to get past those things that we have to cope with and to grow into our greatness. And so work with those therapists. If you have a family medical provider or PCP, Be in tune with him around your health. How is your physical health? Are things looking good? Are your numbers okay? Is your weight okay? Blood pressure, those sorts of things, because you need to take those check light indicators and actually do something with them. And so, working in the system in terms of physical and mental health is very critical. Knowing that you may have options instead of working yourself into the ground. Stop. There's another book, and I'm blanking on the author. It's called Rest is Resistance. It is radical. Sometimes you just need a nap. Sometimes you need a weekend of a nap. Sometimes you need a week of a nap. Perhaps you take that and recognize that you just need a break. You need to decompress from everything and everyone. And I know it may be easier said than done for those of us who are parents. And if you do not have a support network, it's almost physically impossible to do that. But I caution that if your children are out of or in school, they're in daycare, taking a day off if you can, just to decompress, works wonders. Finding a friend if you don't have family, um, if you're concerned about finances, and asking them, would you mind getting my child or children for a day or the weekend? I'll do the favor to you or for you. Many people will. Often we just struggle with asking for help. And so, my caution and my urging is to not be the super person that society says you are and have to be, but to be you and to ask for the help you need and to recognize that just because you ignore that check engine light, just because you cover it up, the problem doesn't go away. It just becomes one of greater magnitude that whenever ultimately things do fall apart, they fall apart in a big way, often a way that takes a lot to fix what could have been fixed when that engine light first came on. So that's just me and my truth, everyone. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your Tuesday. I will be coming back to you more frequently now because I'm committed to being a place and space for people who I know from my conversations with friends and others feel the same way. You're not alone. What we're doing, rest is resistance. Saying no is that word no, it can be a full sentence. And you can say it without guilt. You can say it without tarnishing your image of being this superstar, this overachiever, this greater than life performer. You can say no. You can say this doesn't work for me anymore and I want something better and different. All right. Thank you all. Have a lovely day.